this time period that we're in, theologians have divided our understanding of what God is doing in this whole event. If you take the same biblical history, the Bible presents from creation through eternity and has all of these different events of, the people that lived before the flood and after the flood, and Abraham, and the people that lived around Moses' time and in the kingdom, and those who are at the church, and those who are going to be here during this 1,000-year reign. And so basically, theologians have divided our understanding of how God operates with them into two divisions, either covenant theology or dispensational theology. Covenant theology is pretty simple. What they say is there's two covenants, the covenant of works, and that's before the fall, and then the covenant of grace, and that's after the fall. But within this covenant, they have 7 subdivisions. That's covenant theology. Dispensationalists believe that there are 7 dispensations. So in that sense, covenant theologians and dispensationalists see the same divisions, but they have total different ways of discussing them. Calvary Bible Church is historically a dispensational church that teaches there's the dispensation, and by the way, the word dispensation in Greek, the word is, dispensation is the word oikonomia. That isn't quite spelled right, but oiko is house and nomia are rules or laws. When you go to someone's house, you're supposed to take your shoes off. You're supposed to, wash your hands and, before the meals or whatever, and you kind of have rules. Well, it's how God operated in these different segments. Those are called dispensations. And basically, theologians, these aren't in the Bible, by the way. They're just divisions that people see as they read the Bible, that conscience is before any revelation of God. Finally, with Noah, human government starts. Innocence is before the fall. Conscience is after the fall. Human government is starting in Genesis 9 when God says that if you shed man's blood, by man's hand shall your blood be shed. There begins to be human government. And then the promised and covenants that God made with Abraham. Then when Moses came along, people were responsible. As Paul said, those who have the law will be judged by the law. Those who don't have the law will not be judged by the law. So that's called the dispensation of the law. Then the church, Paul said in Galatians that the law, in Galatians 3, was a schoolmaster that brought us to Christ. In other words, that the law can't do anything except point out. It's kind of like the teacher that doesn't encourage you, just says, don't do that, don't do that, don't do that, that's wrong, that's wrong, that's wrong. That's what the law did. It made us see how far we fall short of God's holiness. So the dispensation of the law is that the people could not get to heaven by keeping the law, but the law was to show them that they had to obey the sacrificial system and trust in another. The whole sacrificial system was that I bring my lamb, I put my hands on it and confess my sins over it because I can't save myself. And so what a dispensationalist would say is, people have always been saved the same way, but God treated them according to how much knowledge they had. If you remember what Paul says, he says that in time past God winked. He overlooked some things because the people did not know that. But now has declared, when Christ came, that all men should repent. And so what he's saying is God treated people differently, but he had one plan of salvation, which has always been substitutionary atonement. Right from the beginning, at the fall of man, what was Adam instructed to do? He was instructed to cover himself and his wife with the skins of an animal that was sacrificed for them. And then they taught their sons that they were to offer the best sacrifices to the Lord. You know what Cain did? He gave God his produce from the 4-H section of the fair. But Abel brought a bloody sacrifice, and God accepted it because Abel did what the Lord wanted. But substitutionary atonement, a substitute, has always been salvation. Salvation, we look back. We're on this side of the cross, and we're looking back at what Christ did for us 2,000 years ago. They, with their substitutionary sacrifices, were looking forward to the offering that God was going to have. And it says in the book of Hebrews, the last verse of chapter 11, that they, before Christ, could not be perfected without us, because we look back on what Christ did and they look forward to it. So this is a dispensational view. And by the way, you see the last one, that God begins operating in another household set of rules during the kingdom. And that's a fascinating time. The kingdom, a major percentage of the Old Testament talks about the millennial kingdom. Maybe 10% of the Old Testament. And it's all kinds of rules. Did you know that God, again, it's his, he can set the rules up he wants. He seems to revert to a lot of the principles from the Mosaic time during the kingdom. They have to come to Jerusalem. They have to offer sacrifices. You say sacrifices? Sacrifices? Oh, I thought Christ did away with sacrifices. Well, wait a minute. Communion is next Sunday night. What is communion? Communion is a memorial celebration looking back at what Christ did on the cross. It is us holding in our hands a picture of his sacrifice. Did the Old Testament people get saved by killing animals? No. They got saved by faith, that God wanted them to realize they couldn't save themselves, that they needed an innocent substitute to take their place. Those animals were dying in the place of the people who deserved to die because of their sin in the Old Testament. So in the kingdom, the millennium time, they are offering the sacrifices, all of which pointed to Christ. It had to be a perfect male, blameless, spotless, that was innocent, that shed its blood helplessly, throat split. The whole picture, every part of the Old Testament sacrificial system pointed to Christ. Every part, even the law of cleansing leprosy. If you read Leviticus, it's this amazing. You take 2 clay pots, you take 2 pigeons, you kill 1 pigeon and actually shed its blood. You put the living pigeon in the pot, you shake it up, and you open the lid and let the bloody pigeon that's alive fly away. And it sounds weird, like gross. Now that's a picture of Christ. They had to have his death, his burial, and his resurrection. So that's why they needed 2 pigeons, because priests couldn't raise pigeons from the dead. And they put the blood of the pigeon that died on the pigeon that lived and allowed it to fly out of the pot to show that Jesus Christ rose from the dead through the sacrifice of his blood is the only way we're cleansed. Every one of those Old Testament sacrifices. So in the dispensation of the kingdom, those sacrifices will be pointing back to the cross. And so that's why the covenant theologians don't even believe in the kingdom, because they can't process why they would have the sacrificial system reinstituted. But no one was saved by the sacrificial system in the Old Testament, neither shall they be saved by it in the kingdom. But that is the dispensational view, is how we can explain what God is doing in what he describes in his word when you look at the whole scope of history.